rather than tell you when to take them down, because it's not really a slide presentation,
Okay.
you can just take them down, Eric, when you feel they're no longer relevant to what I'm saying.
Okay, sounds good.
Was asked to speak for maybe 15 minutes or so, and then leave the rest of the hour for questions. So that's what I'm hoping to do. And I've got Max's backup for things that are going on in Michigan. So you've got a twofer for today. So as I said, I'm the news director at Michigan Radio, and we cover the state here. And it's turning out to be an interesting election again in Michigan. Michigan is one of the states that are frequently referred to as battleground states, and states that are hard fought and important for candidates running for president to win in order to get enough electoral college votes, hitting that magic number of 270 to win the White House. In 2016, Michigan was one of the states that Donald Trump did win in his election to the White House. Like today, in the polls, he was behind in the polls to his Democratic challenger, Hillary Clinton, at that time. Most people thought that Clinton would win Michigan because historically it's favorable to Democrats, and that's because of the large block of Democratic voters that are in Detroit and in the surrounding suburbs. So in 2016, there were more than 4.5 million votes in Michigan, and once they were all counted, and we did get them counted on time, Trump won Michigan by 10,700 votes, so an extremely slim margin of victory. There are lots of ways that people have tried to explain what happened in 2016 besides just a polling failure. A significant thing is that a large number of voters, people who actually went to the polls and voted in the election, did not cast presidential votes in that election year. So they went in and they filled everything else out, but they just skipped whether or not they wanted to vote for a president that year. They did not like Trump, they did not like Clinton, and so they chose not to vote. In Detroit alone, there were more than 11,000 people who did that. And in Oakland County, which is another Democratic stronghold, a county just north of Detroit, 13,000 voters did that in Oakland County. Again, those are strongly Democratic areas. Those votes could have been enough to turn the election. There were also in 2016 more than 200,000 people in Michigan who voted for third-party candidates. So candidates like the Libertarian Party or the Green Party. We even had in 2016 the Constitution Party, which nobody has heard of since. And they got 16,000 votes that year. So that could have been enough in itself to swing the election in 2016. So today, we find ourselves now 6 days away from the presidential election. The polls, again, are predicting that Donald Trump will lose in Michigan. The latest polls, if you average them together, have Biden ahead by about 8 points, but it may be tightening. There was a poll that came out last night that only has Biden ahead by 5 points in Michigan. But so the polls, if you believe them, suggest that Trump is losing this time the support of educated white voters and independent voters, and he also is not picking up any of the support that he didn't get from those people who voted for minor party candidates or didn't vote at all in 2016. So it may be a more difficult road for Trump to eke out a victory in Michigan this time. Again, that's if you believe the polls. Michigan, as I said, does remain an important state in the election. Most of the paths for an electoral college victory for either candidate include winning either 3 of the 4 Midwestern states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin. We heard from a professor from Wisconsin 2 weeks ago, I think, about how important the race is there. Right now, the polling suggests that Trump will probably win Ohio, although that's still a toss-up, and that Biden will probably win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Wisconsin is pretty strong. Michigan and Pennsylvania still close enough that things could possibly go one direction or the other by election day. The Trump campaign is hoping they can pull off an upset again in Michigan, and they're campaigning here almost daily. President Trump was here yesterday. He held a large rally outside at an airport in Lansing. Thousands of people were there. Half of them may be masked, half of them not masked. Vice President Pence will be in Flint, Michigan tonight, also at an airport. And then even Trump's daughter, Tiffany, who we rarely hear about because she's not working in the White House, she's going to be hosting a Breakfast with Tiffany event tomorrow in the Detroit suburb of Birmingham. So they're here, either Trump or a surrogate is here almost every day. Last night's Trump rally in Lansing was like a Beach Boys concert, and that there wasn't anything new, but the crowd cheered all the old hits. Trump again said that Michigan is locked down like a prison. He again claimed that he was once named Michigan Man of the Year. That's an award that does not exist, but every time he's here, he talks about winning that. And he complained about our schools and churches being closed because of the pandemic. And again, that also isn't true, but he makes these statements and the crowd applauds and they eat it up. The Biden campaign spending a lot more money on television ads in Michigan, but not spending as much time here. Kamala Harris was in Detroit on Sunday. Biden is scheduled to be back in the state on Saturday. But the campaigns, the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign are sort of doing the same thing. They're spending their time in the states where they are a few points behind rather than where they seem to be ahead. So Biden is spending his time in places like North Carolina, maybe Georgia, Iowa, places where he's a couple of points down, but might actually be able to turn it with some campaign appearances. We've had a lot of talk about how the polls may be wrong again. And one of the things that people are talking about is that they might be wrong due to what they're calling this time shy Trump voters. And those are people who either have voted or plan to vote for Trump, but are not going to admit it to their friends, their families, or even to the pollsters. They are not really embarrassed, but they just don't want the arguments, the grief that comes with that. And so they're not telling anybody, but they plan to vote for Trump. The Trump campaign seems to think that there are a lot of those types of people in these Midwestern states. The reason I say have voted is because so far in Michigan, more than 2 million voters have already turned in their absentee ballots. That is probably good news for Biden because the absentee ballot voting is strongest in the state right now in those southeast counties where Hillary Clinton did so well in 2016. And Eric, if you could bring up the first slide. This just sort of shows, based upon polling, how voters typically are acting in Michigan. When Eric brings it up, you'll see that Detroit is usually very strong as a Democratic voter, and the suburbs as well. And then outstate usually is much stronger for the Republican candidates. So you can see the sort of the light blue line there is Trump support. The dark blue line is Biden support. Around the Detroit area, Metro Detroit, Detroit proper, a lot stronger support for Biden. And then it's a little bit even, slightly favoring Trump and the rest of the state. And then the northern Michigan and the UP, that is Trump country. Republicans that are running a statewide campaign typically start out at a bit of a disadvantage in Michigan because there is that huge Democratic voting bloc in southeastern Michigan. And it is decisive if it turns out. So Trump has a two-pronged strategy when he's campaigning in Michigan. He's trying to keep support for Biden in the Detroit area and the suburbs low enough that he can overcome it with a strong showing elsewhere in the state. He also needs to find pockets of support, new pockets of support in the rest of the state. Eric, if you could go to the second slide. This sort of gives you a visual look at how this state is voting and polling. So you could see sort of the darker blue areas in Detroit, in Wayne County and Washtenaw County. Lighter blue areas, those are counties that are likely to go for Trump. And then the rest of the state is red or pink. One of the things that I'll remind you, though, when you look at this map is that land doesn't vote, people vote. And again, you've got 40% of the population that are located in that southeast corner. And so, the vote can really, or the election can really be decided by the turnout in that area. 40% of the population is in that area. So the key for the Republican like Trump to win this state is to convince those voters to stay home or to not vote like they did in 2016. Trump's total support across the state has held steady over the past 3 months, so it closely mirrors his job approval ratings, which has hovered roughly in the low 40%. Again, 6 days from now, the voters will decide. Eric, you can lose the slide, thanks. So as we've covered the race, over the past few months in our newsroom, there have been 4 main stories that we think are contributing the most to how people are deciding to vote. The first is Trump's handling of the pandemic. Then there is the increased focus on race relations, Republican efforts to keep voter turnout low, And then this odd thing in Michigan, there was this plan to kidnap our governor, and that sort of became a big story as well. So let's start with COVID. It is back in Michigan, and back in numbers that are higher than last spring. And it's when you talk to voters, it is the top issue. Kamala Harris said in Michigan last Sunday that Trump's handling of the coronavirus epidemic has caused the greatest mass casualty event since World War II. Despite Trump's focus on law and order in the wake of the protests and his desire to talk about the pre-pandemic economy and its successes, most voters that you ask will say that the pandemic is the top issue. So if you look at this chart, when the pandemic first hit in March, Governor Gretchen Whitmer was very aggressive in shutting down the state. Schools closed, gyms, restaurants, movie theaters. There were limitations on how loud crowds could be, both indoors and outdoors. And you can see the successful results of that in this graph. By mid-June, the numbers were very low. And they started to rise again over the summer as things opened up, but they stayed really at manageable levels. So that they plateaued in July and kind of stayed there through mid-September. On October 12th, the state Supreme Court in Michigan ruled that the 1945 law that the governor was using to keep renewing her executive orders about social distancing was unconstitutional. And so the authority for handling the pandemic officially went from the governor to the Republican legislature. And what the Democrats will say is, you can see the result there in the graph. Right after October 12th, things started to climb and are continuing to climb. Now, it's not a direct correlation because right after the governor lost her executive order powers, the state health department instituted many of the same rules. So the rules about masks and social distancing that we were operating under are still in effect, just not under the governor's order. But culturally, what has happened is that now that the governor doesn't have those executive orders, the rules really are being widely ignored in large parts of the state. And in conservative counties, they're even not being enforced. So there are sheriffs in conservative counties that are just saying, we're not even going to bother enforcing these issues. Go about your business. Trump has blamed this spike in Michigan and on other places on what he calls the fake news media conspiracy. And many of his supporters are believing that too. So he's repeatedly claimed in recent days, and including in his last debate, that we are rounding the corner on the pandemic in the United States. And he said in rallies here that after Election Day, it's just going to go away, that this is a media conspiracy and that you're not even going to hear about it after the election. And he said that he tweeted that the media conspiracy is an election law violation that officials should look into. But for Trump, the numbers are going in the wrong direction in Michigan, and COVID is the #1 issue among Biden voters. So if you're a Republican supporter or a Trump supporter in Michigan, you are likely to believe that this has all been exaggerated and it's an economy-destroying overreaction. The highest issue of concern for Trump supporters remains the economy, but when you poll people across the state, COVID is the issue that they talk about first. There's a real similar bipartisan difference in the fear of the disease and in how well voters think Trump and his administration have handled the pandemic. You can almost, if you know what somebody's political preference is, you can guess how they're going to answer questions about COVID. If you could go to the next slide, Eric. The face of the pandemic in Michigan, though, is not really President Trump. It's our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, and most of the time that face now includes a mask. Democrats in Michigan have praised Whitmer for her strong actions in fighting the pandemic and claiming that she has saved lives. The Republicans in Michigan blame her for destroying the economy with an overzealous shutdown and forcing businesses to close and ruining families. And that's sort of part of the narrative that they're talking about in the context of the election. So she has had very public disagreements with the president. The president famously tweeted, "Liberate Michigan," after an anti-mask protest. If you could go to the next slide, Eric. We had an anti-mask protest at our state capitol that featured members of Michigan militias. Here's a picture of that day. You can see many of them are carrying guns. They have Trump signs. And it was after this took place, these mostly men, but these people were protesting the lockdown efforts that the governor had put into place. This is when Trump tweeted, "Liberate Michigan." Some of these men apparently took that command a little too literally, and they plotted to kidnap the governor. either take her to Wisconsin and try her for treason. That was part of the plan. Or another part of their plan was maybe just to shoot her at the front door of her vacation home, or to maybe leave her in a small boat in the middle of Lake Michigan. Next slide, Eric. That will be the last one. So the FBI infiltrated the group, and they've arrested 15 so far. The first 13 that were arrested, you can see in the slide here. There was a real debate among newsrooms in Michigan over whether or not we should be calling these men members of a militia or terrorists because of their actions. A lot of the newsrooms eventually did switch their language and are referring to them as domestic terrorists rather than members of the militia. Although if you live in Michigan, you know what the militias are, and that is a term people are very familiar with. Our governor even wrote an essay in The Atlantic this week blaming Trump and his rhetoric for contributing to this type of violence. And she said this past weekend, though, that if the number of positive COVID cases continue to climb like they are in Michigan, that we may see a second lockdown in the state. My opinion is I think no matter how high the numbers get, if she is going to start shutting stuff down, she will not do that for political purposes before Election Day because she wouldn't want that to become an issue. So things will likely stay the way that they are. Okay, Eric, thanks. You can get rid of the slides for me.
Thanks a lot.
The rest of this is just me, not too much more. So on the issue of race, Black voters across Michigan are really going to be pivotal in deciding who's going to win the presidential race in the state. But engaging them, not only during a pandemic, but also during a period of unrest over the effects of systemic racism, has been challenging for the campaigns. Many young Black voters are energized by the Black Lives Matter movement. We've had daily marches since the killing of George Floyd in Detroit by a group called Detroit Will Breathe. They are involved and excited in those discussions that a lot of Americans are participating in about systemic racism. But the polls are suggesting that they're really not that excited by Biden and by Biden's campaign. Older Black voters, on the other hand, they seem very engaged. Some of that is because COVID-19 has hit communities like Detroit particularly hard, and a disproportionate number of Black voters, especially in the early part of the pandemic, were affected by it, or they know somebody who was affected by it. So for them, for those older Black voters, 2020's election is really a referendum on the president's response to the crisis, and for them, the president did not respond to the crisis very well. Black voters are much more likely to see many of the president's actions, statements, and tweets also as racist. And they are not buying it when Trump says he is the least racist person in the room during a debate. And they're not buying it when Trump says that he has done more for Black people than any other president than Abraham Lincoln. For the 2020 campaign, Trump says that he has created record economic gains for Black Americans over the last 4 years. And those claims really just don't withstand any close scrutiny and are certainly not borne out by the numbers in Michigan. Trump will sometimes say that he is responsible for 5 new auto plants factories opening in Michigan, and it's just not the case. It hasn't happened. So to be clear, nobody expects that Trump will win the Black vote in Michigan, but the goal for his campaign is to dampen that enthusiasm for Biden, like it did for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and perhaps just keep those voters from bothering to vote. Democrats claim that the president is getting help in this effort to dampen the vote from Republicans in our state legislature, who are apparently working to keep absentee votes and Black votes as low as possible, if you agree with the Democratic arguments that they're making. There are lots of examples that they provide for this. I'll touch on just 3 quickly. The Democrats wanted county clerks in Michigan to be able to count any absentee ballot that was mailed in, as long as the postmark, so as long as the mailing was by Election Day. So you could vote absentee and even go to the post office on Election Day to mail it. And if it was postmarked that day, eventually it would be counted. The Republicans went to court to stop that and won. So the situation in Michigan is that absentee ballots, the only absentee ballots that will be counted are those that are received by county clerks by 8 p.m. on Election Day. So what county clerks and our Secretary of State and Democrats are telling voters around Michigan is that if you have not mailed your absentee ballot in yet, take it in person, because you can't trust that it will get there in time to be counted if you put it in the mail today. President Trump also in a debate called for his supporters to be poll watchers on election day. If you're in Germany, this might be a weird concept, or even in some other states, but in Michigan, anybody, myself and any adult, can go to the polls and watch, just stand there and watch. And what they're doing is making sure that the rules are being followed. They can report any suspected voter fraud to individuals who are called poll challengers. And the challengers have to be assigned. Those are appointed individuals, but anybody can appoint themselves a poll watcher and go and just observe what's happening. There's a Republican candidate for the state house who is suing in Michigan for a requirement that requires these poll watchers to stay 6 feet away from poll workers on election day because of the pandemic. So we're all supposed to stay 6 feet apart from each other. And we'll see where that court case goes. But a judge ruled just yesterday that these poll workers can openly carry their guns in the polling place if they want. That is being appealed likely this afternoon, but there are many Democrats who say that armed white people at the polls in black precincts are going to intimidate voters, and that would keep the number of black voters, the number of black votes down. So we're expecting all sorts of legal things to be legal cases to be filed, not only on election day but in the days after. Republican and Democratic attorneys are preparing for legal battles all over the state on election results. Just to sum up, the polling suggests that the Biden is in the lead rather among those who have already voted. Trump is probably favored to win among those who will go on election day and vote. It just remains to be seen whether that margin is going to be enough to compensate for Biden's advantage in the early vote. It's going to make election coverage really interesting as well. And on election night, depending upon how things are counted, we think that it's probably going to look like an early Trump lead on election night in Michigan if the clerks are counting all the votes of the people who voted that day. Whether or not the Trump campaign declares victory in Michigan Wednesday morning and then things get really confusing as clerks continue to count the rest of the vote remains to be seen. We just don't know what's going to happen. Our Secretary of State has said that they may not get all the absentee votes counted until Friday. So one of the things that we're trying to share with our audience during that time is that this isn't really a delay. This is the way it's supposed to work. And American audiences has become very used to getting their results on election night. And with the exception of Bush v. Gore, we usually know by Wednesday who has won, and that may not be the case this year. We also are planning to cover that in our newsroom by staggering our staff. So I'm probably not giving any secrets away to Max here. We don't really consider XYZ the competition, but we are in the same market in Detroit. But we're staggering our staff. So we hope to have, it's a small staff, but we'll have people that are paying attention from 3 a.m. until midnight, election day through Friday, so that if a race is called and when results start to come in on any given race, we'll be able to report on that right away for our next newscast and also get it up online. Unfortunately, no matter who wins the presidency, even if we don't know for weeks, we're also preparing in our newsroom for the possibility of violence. We certainly don't hope this is going to happen. We're not talking about it because we don't want to make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. But there is talk about the possibility of protests, civil unrest, especially if one side feels like the election was stolen from them. And so we've spent a fair amount of money over the summer. All my reporters have these helmets and gas masks. We have at the station, we don't have enough for everybody, but enough for any given night. We've got Kevlar vests that we bought for reporters to wear if that's necessary. And then I had to send out this weird email to my staff, sort of asking them their level of comfort with being able to cover different levels of protests. So I have, it ranges from everything. I have reporters who say, this is a pandemic and I've got an immunocompromised individual at home and I'm not going out to any large crowd to cover it, all the way up to reporters who are like, yes, this is news, send me in, whatever it is, I'm willing to go and we'll go cover it. And then there's different variations in between, but we're also prepared for that. So that's how things look in Michigan. Hopefully it will stay calm. Maybe we'll know by Wednesday, but we're thinking that if the polls are to believe, it's a Biden win by 5 to 8 points, and we probably won't know until the Wednesday or the Friday rather after the election. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and those that I can't answer, I will toss to Max.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Vincent. If you want to write in some questions there in the chat room, we'll go from there. I mean, usually I'll ask a question, but Michael Gargiulo's jumped right in. Go ahead, Michael. What's your question?
Oh, I wanted to ask how popular the governor is, and was there any backlash against Trump for the alleged attempt to kidnap and kill her?
So the first question, Whitmer remains fairly popular in Michigan. Especially her, there are even a lot of people who would be independents and even some Republicans who have praised her efforts in fighting the pandemic. And so the hardcore partisan Republicans have fought her every step of the way. And no matter what she does, they have fought against it. But they haven't been able to really gain a majority of dislike or anger towards the governor for what she's done to battle the pandemic. That also, how you feel about that and the answers that you're likely to get also depends upon where you are in the state. So in the very Republican northern Michigan area of the state, that's a little bit more perhaps atomistic and independent in their thinking as well. She's not liked up there. But when you get into the urban areas, even in conservative cities like Grand Rapids, there's support there, and I think that she has and continues to have support for her actions against the pandemic. The Democrats, I think, tried, and certainly Whitmer has tried to blame Trump or place some of the blame for the alleged kidnapping attempt on Trump and blaming his rhetoric. Trump's response has been that it was the FBI and federal officials who put a stop to this, and she should be sending him thank you notes. That he deserves thanks for the federal government infiltrating these groups. Whether or not you think Trump had any role to play in that is really going to depend upon personal partisanship. I think most of the people who are Democrats and big supporters of Whitmer or even just don't like Trump would say, yes, Trump's rhetoric was to blame. The people who are Trump supporters and hardcore Republicans in the state are going to say this was a rogue group. These were not very smart guys who created a gang that couldn't shoot straight and didn't even really have a plan. This was just all a lot of talk on their part. They weren't even smart enough to pull this off if they were going to give it a try. Certainly they could have caused some damage, but it wasn't a very good plan. It wasn't a well thought out plan. And they not only do they not represent Republicans in Michigan, they don't represent the militia. Even Second Amendment advocates and supporters of the militia are quick to distance themselves from this group and say that they're not us. This is a real fringe group, and what Trump said didn't influence them.
Okay, thanks. Another one?
I saw a question in the chat. Sure.
Michael, another question, or should we go to Jessica? Okay.
Oh,
Jessica Prater.
I can go to Jessica's question.
Pardon?
Yep. So legally, so our absentee ballots go in 2 envelopes. So you when you vote absentee, you fold your ballot up and you put it first in the secrecy envelope, and so that only has the number of the ballot that shows on the top, and then you have to take that envelope and put it inside the mailing envelope and either take or mail that to your local clerk's office. And one of the things that they're concerned about in Michigan is what they call naked ballots, which is not, I'm going to steal this joke from the New York Times, but it's not as titillating as it sounds. What a naked ballot is if you forgot to put it in the secrecy ballot, then it's not counted. So those will be discarded. But when they will be counted, they are allowed to, on Monday, county clerks can have people take the secrecy envelope out of the outside envelope. So on Monday, there are going to be lots of people whose job it is just to open these envelopes, take the second envelope out, and put these in stacks. And then on Monday, as soon as the polls open at 7 a.m., people can start counting those. So they have lots of people that they are bringing in just to begin counting those votes as soon as election day begins. And what many clerks are saying, especially in smaller population areas, is that they expect that they'll have those counted as well as the votes cast that day, maybe by 3 or 4 in the morning the next morning. In heavily populated counties, if we actually have 3 million absentee ballots, they're really, it's just, I don't think possible for them to get them all counted on that day, even if they start at 7 a.m. And you know, nothing against Wayne County, and I know that that's where Max is, but if he's been around long enough, he knows that this is true. Wayne County is always very slow. Even on off-year elections, it takes Wayne County a fair amount of time to get their votes counted. And some of it is just it's the most populated part of the state. It also has some of the oldest infrastructure and oldest voting situations, and really because of the legislature doesn't have enough polling places for some of the precincts. And so in Michigan, if you are in line when the polls close, you're still allowed to vote. And so some of the polling places are staying open, will stay open until like 9 or 9:30, because if you were still in line, you get to vote. So they will start counting at 7 a.m. The smaller counties or the less populated counties might have them finished along with their regular votes, but in the heavily populated counties, who knows?
Can I ask one more question just to follow up?
Yes,
Is it put on, are the ballots scanned or are they counted by hand or by sight?
They're scanned.
Okay.
So they're and the process is the same at both the poll and the clerk's office. They're taken out. There's a little strip of paper that's perforated on the top. They rip that off and are looking at the numbers. They have to verify the signature as well, but they can do that if they've opened up the day before. Those are on the outside envelope, so they can do that the day before. But they'll rip that off, validate the number, and then feed it into the machine. I mean, when I have voted in person, it takes, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds at most, 15 if the machine is slow, to go through the machine and get the little green button that it's been tabulated. So I'm not an expert, and maybe Max knows difference, but by my personal experience, they could probably run 10 to 15 ballots through a machine in a minute. I hope they have a lot of machines and a lot of volunteers that are trained to do this.
Can I ask one more question? You touched on this about the militia. I was not aware that was a thing in Michigan prior to that whole fiasco with the governor. So you're saying that this is like an ongoing thing in Michigan, like even before this situation, there are people that consider themselves militia and do stuff like that all the time?
Long before, yeah. I mean, when I've been here 14 years, and they were here. I'd have to look up on it. They've been here for a long time. These are Second Amendment enthusiasts. I mean, if I were to be critical, these are Second Amendment enthusiasts who like to cosplay Army in the woods in Michigan, and so they get together. They bring their guns, and they pretend to prepare for an attack from Canada. I don't know, but they're like clubs, and there are very large organizations, and then there are some splinter organizations, and they call themselves militia, and they are not well regulated militia, like a National Guard, but they get together, they camp, they hunt, and they run through the woods with their guns. I'm not a member of one, but it's perfectly legal. We have the right to own firearms, and we have the right to peaceably assemble. And so unless or until they break the law, there's no reason in Michigan why they can't do this. And it's something that many people have done for quite a long time.
Vince, at the time of the Oklahoma City bombing, in the early hours after the bombing, there was a great deal of attention paid by the FBI to certain militias in Michigan. And in fact, there were some tenuous links between McVeigh, Nichols, and some of the militias. That goes back a very long time. So the FBI was aware of them even then. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I was just going to say, I was in Illinois when working in Champaign-Urbana when that happened, so I wasn't familiar with what was in Michigan at that time. But I'm not surprised that there were some tenuous links. They're much more linked together now because of social media, which didn't really exist during the time of the Oklahoma City bombing. But these men, and they're mostly men, I mean, they're going to the same gun shows. They are sharing the same literature. They know each other, and so it wouldn't surprise me that if the FBI were to try to be in contact with all of Timothy McVeigh's friends and associates at that time, that some of those men would be members of Michigan militia too.
Hey, Vince, I want to ask about the militia.
They claim to be non-political. Sure. Yeah.
I just want to ask about, I mean, watching the media in Europe, the media coverage of Michigan, it was really scary. It seemed like half the state was ready to storm the Capitol. Listening to you talk, I get the feeling maybe it was just a small group of a few people. It was a small, limited group. Is that fair? That maybe the media in the U.S. blew it up to make it seem like a bigger movement than it really was?
Well, so on that day where the Capitol was stormed, it was called Operation Gridlock, and that was put together. It was organized by a conservative caucus organization in Michigan that gets some funding from inadvertently from the DeVos family, which is a big conservative funder of many things in Michigan. And it wasn't just militia. The militia was a small and certainly the most photogenic part of that day. But the goal, what Operation Gridlock was supposed to do, was to get Republican people and business owners who were opposed to the shutdown in Michigan to basically get in their cars and have a social distance protest and in Lansing by driving their cars around the Capitol and creating gridlock, which they were successful at doing. And there were more than 1,000 people who participated in this. Hundreds of people got out of their cars and held a unmasked protest at the Capitol. Of those 100, dozens were probably in camo and carrying AR-15s or other long arms. And those dozens, eventually maybe 3 dozen or so, forced themselves into the Capitol. I mean, that's another story. You're allowed to take guns into our Capitol building. You can't take signs, protest signs, because you might injure somebody with them or damage the Capitol, but you can take your gun in. So they went in, and then they eventually were let into the upper gallery. So there are pictures of these men dressed in camouflage holding AR-15s. 2 of them were the Null brothers, who are also part of the group that are accused of trying to kidnap the governor. But it's not correct to think that it was a mass gathering of hundreds of militia members who stormed the Capitol. It was a large and unruly group that remained peaceful, that went into the Capitol. It was maybe hundreds that were on the lawn. Most of the people who participated or organized that protest, though, were either staying outside or were driving around the Capitol in their cars, trying to create gridlock and send that message.
I was wondering too about how difficult and challenging it is for you trying to be neutral in a state like this. It seems very, very polarized. Is that difficult for you? Do you get criticized from both sides, or how do you thread the needle and report neutrally and unbiased in a state like this where it's so polarized?
We do get criticized by both sides. I'm sure Max probably gets this at XYZ as well. Almost every story that we do, we are either a mouthpiece for the man, and we are not, calling Trump the liar that he is, or calling Trump the racist that he is, and downplaying the evil. And we are referring to these men as militia members when they are terrorists. And so then we certainly get a lot of criticism from the right as well, that we are, we're the liberal media, and we are intentionally overplaying the threat of COVID-19, and it's no worse than the flu, and we are clearly on Biden's side, and we'll hear, lots of people will echo the president's statements that we are the enemy of the American people. I don't know if this is it might be worse at XYZ because those people are on television and recognizable, but the amount of hate mail that we get, the amount of threats that reporters receive, certainly the women reporters, threats that include threats of sexual violence has increased. So it's not a pleasant time to be in our business, because we really are getting it from both sides, and people are so polarized and so angry, and every sentence that we write is parsed and picked apart, and people are looking for reasons to be angry with us. So we edit things very carefully. What I also have a difficult time doing is reminding my own staff that they need to tone it down on their own personal social media. They're humans, and they sometimes will feel attacked or have strong opinions, especially about the discussions that we're having about systemic racism. And they have to remember that everything that they say on the social media platform reflects back on Michigan radio. We are having, like many media outlets, real difficult, complicated, heartfelt discussions about what does objectivity mean, what does non-biased mean, and how open and personal do we allow our staff to be on social media. I have in the past been, I'm 56 and I'm a cishet white manager, right? And so I've got all the suspicions that come with that. And in the past, I have been sort of that traditional journalism 101 person. I'm certainly not woke, but I have learned a lot and given this issue a lot of thought and belabored over this quite a bit over the past year. And we are redoing our social media policy. It won't be done by election day, but I think that when we come out of the other side of this, we're going to be a lot more willing to let our staff be human on their social media outlets, but it's going to be still a difficult thing to police, because it's sort of like the Supreme Court justice said about pornography, right? When people cross the line, I can't define it, but I'll know it when I see it. And so those conversations rather are going to be more difficult, but more important in the future, because people really are looking for any reason to criticize us.
Okay.
I just want to touch on the ballot things. We did touch on this, but I'm happy to say again, that right now we have just over 2 million absentee ballots that have been mailed in. There were a little more than 3 million that were requested, and the Secretary of State's office has estimated that she expects roughly 3 million absentee ballots will be in Michigan. So there are about a third that are outstanding. If you don't use your absentee ballot, voting is a little bit more complicated on election day, but still possible. You need to take it to your clerk, void it, and then go vote, or you can void it yourself, and then you can get what's called a provisional ballot in Michigan and vote. And then later, the clerks can make sure that you all the votes have a barcode and they scan our licenses, so the clerks will do their best to make sure that you did not vote twice. And if you did not, if they don't have any record of your absentee ballot coming in, then your provisional ballot can be counted. That, of course, also takes time and likely won't be done on election night. This is a laptop.
You said there's 3 million absentee ballots. How many voters altogether in Michigan? How many voters altogether?
Almost 6. Max, help me out. I'm going from memory. I think there was just a little more than 4 million who voted last time in the presidential election, but I think there are about 6 million and
I think
change registered voters.
I think it's closer to 7. I could be wrong. I do think they're
Okay.
anticipating about, based on what the Secretary of State said yesterday, they're anticipating about 60 to 65% of the vote to come from absentee. So you're looking at about 5 million, 5+ million vote, which I believe would be a record in the presidential election. I can try and pull it up really quickly.
So about half absentee ballots.
Thanks. Yeah, we have. I mean, we've already surpassed by far the number of absentee ballots that were submitted in the 2016 election. And I don't want to paint a false picture. The majority of those ballots are coming from Southeast Michigan and presumed to be coming from Democrats, but Republicans are sending in absentee ballots as well, and they're not ignoring this. I think that the partisan Republicans are going to vote on election day because nobody's going to stop them from voting on election day, and they'll show up without their mask to do so. But if you look at counties across the state that are Republican strongholds, there's also a higher than normal level of absentee ballots that are being submitted in those areas as well. And a lot of that, I think, is just pandemic driven. People would just rather not have to go out if they don't have to.
Vince or Max, did Michigan reflect the rest of the country in 2016 by having the lowest African-American voter turnout in 20 years?
I'm not sure how to compare Michigan to other states because we have, I mean, Detroit is 84% African-American. Wayne County itself has a large African-American population, as does Flint, even Grand Rapids to an extent. I'm not sure. They were low. They were analysts say low enough that it gave Trump his very slim margin of victory. Whether they were historically low, I don't know. Well, it also depends upon how far you go back with historically.
The country wasn't historically low. I'm just saying that in 2016, the country had its lowest African-American voter turnout in 20 years. Not historically, but in 20 years.
Right. Okay. It would not surprise me. I don't want to go on the record as saying that I know that to be true because I'd have to look it up. I don't know.
Okay, thanks. We've got another couple of minutes. Any last questions out there from anybody? Or Vince, are you worried about violence? Are you really worried about violence on election day? Is that going to happen in Michigan?
Not on election day. We are prepared for violence after a winner is called or announced or projected. We think that if the race is if it's a blowout for Biden, it's probably not going to be a problem. If it's a very, very close Biden win or a very, very close Trump win, which is at this point we think the only way that it would be is a very, very close Trump win. The potential for violence from the other side exists. I don't want to overplay it, and I don't know that it would be across the country. We in Michigan. Maybe not like you'd expect. The most violent Black Lives Matter protests we had were in Grand Rapids, which is a Western Michigan, majority white conservative state. And if you look at or city, and if you look at the video, it seemed to be a lot of white suburbanite young people who were committing the violence. As much as the president keeps including Detroit in his list of Democrat-run cities that are being burned down and are filled with Antifa residents and are out of control, it's really just not true. We've had major protests. We have not had violence really to speak of in Detroit. Looting has not been a problem. Fires have not been a problem. I mean, Max can back me up on this, but we had some tense nights. We've had some tear gas. We've had canisters being thrown back and forth. We've had nights where there were a number of arrests. But I was out during covering some of these issues. I never really felt like I was possibly in danger of being arrested or hit with a rock that wasn't meant for me. But for the most part, the protesters in Detroit have been very disciplined and have worked with the leaders of Detroit Will Breathe to keep things under control. And to their credit, it has not gotten out of control. Even if things get tense in Detroit after the election, my hope is that those leaders of these organizations can continue to keep things under control and be as successful as they have so far.
Yeah, I live about a mile and a half east of the city, and I think at most we've maybe had a couple broken windows. I think that's the worst damage that we've had on daily protests going back to the George Floyd killing. Detroit almost has a sense of pride of place a little bit. You know, a lot of people say the outsiders are coming in to protest. We protect our city. It's like a family feel. I can talk bad about Detroit, but nobody else is going to talk bad about Detroit. No one's going to come in and mess with our city too.
And they really have been successful at sort of self-policing or keeping the crowd under control. So somebody starts to look like they're going to do vandalism or start violence. There's people around that individual talking them down and saying, this is not us, this is not why we're here, this is not what we're supposed to be doing, this is not going to be helpful. And they're listened to. They've just done a great job.
Okay, we're right up to the hour mark, so we should probably stop now. And I apologize to Zlatan and anybody else who just joined us.